has a special interest in Parkinson's disease and has spoken to support groups as well as professional organizations on the role of nutrition in supporting people with Parkinson's. Ladies and gentlemen, I introduce to you Erin.
Hi, everyone. Let me share my screen here and get my presentation up for you. So thank you, Erica, for the introduction, and thank you, everyone, for letting me present to you today. So this is intended to be like relatively more casual, and to be honest, I find that the more support groups I speak at, that the more I have to learn from all of you. So if you have any questions, if you want to share a personal story about any of these things that we talk about, like I think all of that is fantastic and just makes this presentation and this work even more meaningful. And my goal for why I created this and why I do this is that I think there's a lot of good research in regards to nutrition and how nutrition can help facilitate our wellness and well-being. And unlike a medication that your doctor just prescribes and you just take it, nutrition, you have choices. And so you can choose what things work for you and what things don't. So I think it's helpful to at least know, like, what is the research out there? Is this something that I want to try for myself, or are there things I want to take a whirl at and kind of go from there? So we'll go ahead and get started. So my overall objectives is to kind of have an understanding or build an understanding of the role of nutrition with management of Parkinson's, to learn some tips and tricks for symptom management, review some of the research ideas on improving the efficacy of levodopa or cinnamate, and introducing emerging research trends in Parkinson's nutrition. So that can include things like probiotics. We'll talk about that a bit. And as my disclaimer, I tell everyone when I present is that, like medical therapy, nutrition therapy is best when it is individualized. I think especially with Parkinson's, every person with Parkinson's looks a little bit different. Every Parkinson's is a little bit different. Where you're at can change and will change likely. And so what you need at each moment may vary quite a bit. So it's hard to give a general discussion about Parkinson's specifically because it can look so different for so many different people. So I try to cover all the general bases that I can, but just keep in mind, some things may apply, some things may not apply, some things may not apply right now. Just take everything with a grain of salt. And if something works well for you, then I think that's my goal, is just to provide some information and empower you to have some knowledge under your belt to see what things you can do to help improve your health and well-being. So first, generally, let's talk about the nitty-gritty and talk about nutrition. First things first. So the golden platinum rule of nutrition is that adequate nutrition is always, always, always more important than smaller diet modifications. So we'll talk about ways we can change our foods to support our overall health and well-being. However, if you are having a hard time eating enough food, that will, regardless of what you're eating, if you're not able to eat enough to sustain yourself, that's definitely a bigger concern. And so we always want to make sure we don't want to restrict somebody who's not already eating very well. So always, 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 we want to make sure they're eating enough. And once we're eating enough, then we can make some decisions about what we're eating and see if we want to make some changes there. And specifically with Parkinson's, there are some consequences to not meeting your nutrition goals and reasons why a dietitian might get involved, or we might think of ways we can help facilitate some of those gaps in your nutrition. And so, and a lot of this is talking about like unintentional weight loss or unintentional ability to meet nutrition goals. So if your physician says that a little healthy weight change may be appropriate, or maybe if you want to do that, that might be a different story, but this is all talking about like unintentional, like I cannot keep my weight on, I am losing weight and I don't want to. So specific to Parkinson's, there's an increased risk of weight loss and malnutrition with dyskinesia. So those additional movements, that difficult to control movements, does carry with it some increased risk of weight loss and malnutrition. And there's an increase in lipolysis, which is basically unintentional fat breakdown, with levodopa, or which is the active component of cinnamon, and dopamine agonists, such as pramipexole and ropinirole. Muscle loss is associated with worsening disease symptoms in people with Parkinson's. So if you're unable to eat enough protein and you're not able to move around as much, you're not able to eat enough, and you start to lose some muscle, that can be a little bit more harmful in Parkinson's disease specifically. And in early Parkinsonism, unintentional weight loss is also associated with increased dependence, so a little less functional ability. And unintentional weight loss is also associated with loss of dopaminergic function, so loss of neuron function. Your brain likes tons of nutrition. It takes in a lot of nutrition every day. It's a metabolism powerhouse. So being unable to meet some of those nutrition goals can make your brain not work quite at its best, if you will. So in terms of if we're having a difficulty meeting our nutrition goals, what are ways we can make adding calories or adding nutrition easier? How do we eat with ease? So the best way to increase your calorie intake is to add like fat dense foods. Fat is very calorie dense. So if you're having a tough time, especially with like as foods get harder to chew, if you're finding you're getting tired easily, adding something like avocado, butters, peanut butters, like let's say for breakfast, you have a bowl of oatmeal, you can add some butter, some cream, some peanut butter to it to really make it really like nutrient dense. That way you're getting a lot of nutrition for an easier to eat food in a smaller amount. So hopefully that can help sustain you a little bit better. Now, protein is the building block of muscle, and getting in good protein can help you build muscle or at least maintain muscle. But those protein foods end up being some of the harder ones to eat. So those things like chicken and beef or fish or pork, those can get a little harder to eat if you're having any difficulty with chewing. So other easy ways to add protein is just to add either protein powders or like a dry milk powder. Those are easy sources of protein that can kind of beef up any food you're eating. So you could add that to the cream of wheat in the morning with your peanut butter, add a little dry milk powder just to give it a little extra protein boost to help keep those muscles nice and healthy. And if you're having difficulty with chewing, sometimes those fruits and veggies are also kind of hard to chew. So if you're unable to eat a good variety of foods like those fruits and veggies, a multivitamin with minerals may be helpful. We'll talk about supplements a bit more later as well. But when you're buying supplements, and this is kind of a rule of thumb anyway, so the FDA has taken a stance of not intervening in the supplement industry, and which means that supplements are not regulated. Nobody is monitoring what goes into a supplement, if it does what it says it will, and if you're getting what you're paying for. So you could buy like a probiotic on the shelf, and there is no guarantee that what you're paying for and what's written on the label is what they're actually selling if they're under the guise of a supplement, because there's no regulation of those products, unfortunately. Now, that being said, there are some third-party organizations like the USP label you see on the right here. So those organizations, so some companies will opt for this special certification where somebody is coming in to take a look to ensure that you're getting what you're paying for. So that multivitamin actually has 2,000 milligrams of potassium, something like that. So if you're gonna buy supplements, whether it's fish oil, whether it's a multivitamin, a probiotic, or anything else, if you can find ones that have that USP label on it, I think that will get, and at least ensure that you're getting a little bit more bang for your buck or a little bit more insurance for that. Now, if you're having a hard time with pills, chewable and liquid vitamin options can also be helpful. Just make sure they're capturing all those minerals as well that may be important for your overall health. So let's say we do need soft foods. I have a number of patients who require pureed foods as an example, as chewing gets maybe more difficult. So ways that we can make those taste better, because most people don't get too excited about pureed chicken breast. So I usually encourage them to eat foods that are normally thick or soft, things like mashed potatoes or mashed sweet potatoes or grits, or like egg salad. And then if you need thicker beverages, finding ones that have some good flavor, whether using Crystal Light with your thickener can really make it helpful or a bit more appetizing, if you will. And when you're blending food items, using, instead of like diluting it with water, adding more sauces or gravies or broth to make sure that that flavor is added in. But because of the salt content of sodium is a concern for you. And then there are a number of free resources online. So there's this Dining with Dysphagia cookbook that's written by speech therapists and dietitians. There's Beyond the Blender. There's a number of good resources online. It's a pretty easy Google search if you just search dysphagia cookbook. I can also send you some links if you're interested afterwards. And then if you want something to buy, this is a cookbook written by a dietitian and a speech language pathologist of just some easier recipes that may be a little bit more appetizing. But honestly, as long as you're making something that's already soft or adding some flavorful stuff to it, it should be just fine. Now, when it comes to medical nutrition therapy, so medical nutrition therapy is sort of a fancy phrase for condition-specific nutrition. And there is specific research in Parkinson's looking at, are there foods that may help delay disease progression? Are there foods that may lead to faster disease progression? Are there diets or ways of eating that may help manage disease progression or slow it down a little bit? And with nutrition, it's hard to get, we think of like the highest quality data being a randomized controlled trial. You aren't able to do that with nutrition research at all, quite the same as you would like take this pill or don't take this pill. But we are able to get decent quality data looking at these things, and larger data tends to help too. So there's a physician researcher in Washington, the state of Washington, who has an ongoing Parkinson's study that she's using. I think it's like over 1,200 patients now who are enrolled, and they'll list what kinds of foods they're eating, and they fill out a questionnaire of Parkinson's disease severity. And so she's been tracking this group for like over a decade now and assessing, are there foods that are associated with faster rate of disease progression or slower rate of disease progression? And she republishes the data every several years if there are any updates. So the foods that people with slower rates of Parkinson's progression tended to eat were fresh vegetables, fresh fruits, nuts and seeds, non-fried fish, it's like baked, grilled, broiled fish, if you will, olive oil, wine, coconut oil, fresh herbs and spices. So people who tended to eat more of these foods tended to also have a slower rate of disease progression. The people who had slightly faster rates of disease progression had tended to have higher intakes of canned fruits and vegetables, diet and non-diet sodas, fried foods, beef, ice cream, yogurt, and cheese. And I will say that these were like on a gradient. So the ice cream, the yogurt, and the cheese had like a slightly negative association, but it was relatively minimal. So things like the fresh vegetables and the fresh fruit had a hugely positive benefit. Same thing with the non-fried fish. So, you can kind of take what you want here, or add more of the good things as you're able to kind of help keep a more balanced approach. So a year later, there was a different observational study done by different researchers looking at participants who had baseline Parkinsonism, looking at roughly 280 of them. And they talked to them about what they called a MIND diet. This is an acronym for a very long phrase, so bear with me, but it's the Mediterranean Diet Intervention for Neurodegenerative Delay. So it's basically like a Mediterranean style diet with an added bonus of encouraging berries. That they were studying to see how this has an influence on neurologic disorders that are associated with like a progressive neurologic decline. So that could be Parkinson's, that could be Alzheimer's, or many other things. But this particular portion of it was just looking at Parkinson's. And they found that people who adhered more closely to this particular diet tended to have delayed disease progression. So again, it's like a kind of like a Mediterranean style diet. So we think of more fresh fruits and vegetables, more seafood, more nuts and seeds, more olive oil, and fresh herbs. So those are the kinds of, so very similar to the above study. So kind of along those lines. And then a little earlier, another study was looking at the hippocampal atrophy. So the area of your hippocampus is kind of an important area for both Alzheimer's disease as well as Parkinson's disease. So keeping in those particular conditions are associated with atrophy or sort of slightly, becoming smaller hippocampus region of your brain. So we want to find ways to help keep that hippocampus nice and big and healthy. And so they found in this study that adhering more closely to a Mediterranean style diet, and I mean, I think it's called Mediterranean, but really, as long as you're like choosing more whole grains or fresh fruits or vegetables, there's many regions of the world that eat that way. So call it what you will, but the focus is on fresh fruits and vegetables, whole grains. We're having more fiber, which we're going to talk a lot about fiber today, so get ready. More fiber, and then those nuts, those seeds, and like using oils versus butters in your cooking. So next, please interrupt if you have any questions or if you have any comments or anything like that. This is, again, totally open. I don't want to dominate too much here. But for our next section, we'll talk about specifically like how we can use nutrition for symptom management. So constipation, I will start by telling you pooping is very important. And it's maybe even especially important in Parkinson's. And so there's been a lot of research looking at gut health and gut integrity with Parkinson's disease. And researchers have summarized, and I'll interpret this in a moment, but intestinal inflammation and Parkinson's pathology may precede a pathologic nervous system change by a period of years. So what they're thinking is that a lot of researchers now believe that Parkinson's actually starts in your gut. Those buildups of those kind of denatured proteins actually may start in your gut, and then over a period of years travel to your brain. And they think that that's why constipation is one of the most common symptoms in Parkinson's. And often somebody will find that they're struggling with constipation well before they have a diagnosis of Parkinson's disease. So there is some association of being in your 40s or 50s or 60s and having struggles with constipation, that may be a risk factor for developing Parkinson's later in life. So we define constipation as having less than 3 bowel movements per week, or having hard or small or difficult to pass stools. And those are things that may have some correlation with Parkinson's, but we're still kind of working on what that may be. So in terms of managing constipation, we want adequate fiber and adequate water. So it's important to have both those things. I think of fiber as like a sponge, right? If you're trying to clean the kitchen counter and you have a sponge, if it's a dry sponge, it's not very helpful for cleaning things out, right? You got a dry sponge, you're not going to clean the dirty counter very well. If you have a wet sponge, that's a whole lot more useful. So getting in adequate fiber is helpful for cleaning things out, keeping you moving, keeping everything good. But if you don't have enough water, then that doesn't help fiber work its best. And I do suggest using bowel care as needed. So whether that's Miralax, whether that's Senna, helping with regularity and preventing straining can be very helpful, because some people, especially with Parkinson's, you tend to get lightheaded as you get up maybe, and we'll talk about that in a moment too. But if you're getting lightheaded if you're straining to go to the bathroom, that can be kind of dangerous. If you pass out, we don't want you to do that. So we want to make things nice and soft and easy to move here. So a lot of people ask about fiber supplements, and some work better than others specifically for constipation management. So I have a yes and no here. And really, it's not quite that clear cut. The no, the no section can also be somewhat helpful for managing constipation, but you really need a lot of water with those ones. And they work more for stool bulk, making like big stool and softer big stools. But those are things like wheat dextrin, which is usually there's like a brand called Benefiber, and that's where you'll find that one. And fiber gummies are often, in Fiber One bars, often use inulin. So those are types of fiber that add to stool bulk. So they may, and they tend to be very gas producing because your little gut bacteria really like them. So that's good, but it can be a little uncomfortable too. But things like psyllium or coarse wheat brands, so psyllium, a common brand of that would be Metamucil. Those have been found to be very helpful for managing constipation. Having some Metamucil with your breakfast in the morning or some psyllium, and then having it again in the evening perhaps can really help facilitate good regularity and healthy bowels. Dry mouth is another somewhat common one that medications can be kind of a culprit for. So Maui's tend to have a side effect of dry mouth, and taking frequent sips of water throughout the day can help with that. Hard candies and gum kind of increase your natural saliva production. So those can be helpful for managing that. And just being careful with things that dry you out. So alcohol containing mouthwashes or caffeinated beverages, and alcohol in general can also lead to more dry mouth kind of sensation. This is a very long, complicated phrase, but neurogenic orthostatic hypotension. This refers to when you get lightheaded or dizzy when you're going from sitting or laying down to standing. And it's called neurogenic because the cause of it is thought to be something neurologic related, or it can also be a side effect of medications. So it's this low blood pressure can be, like I said, a side effect of medications. Ways we manage it is to make sure you have a sufficient fluid intake throughout the day. So the mornings might be harder because you wake up a little dehydrated, you haven't been drinking water in your sleep. So just kind of be more careful in those times. And when you wake up in the morning, maybe have a little water before you just drink the coffee, because coffee can increase urination. So if you're already a little dry, that can make you a little bit drier. So just need to be mindful of. And some like runners, if you will, or athletes will use extra salt as a way to make their body hold on to fluids, which I think is great, and that can be very helpful. But just be careful if you have any like kidney disease or heart conditions, you might need to watch that salt intake and be a little bit more cautious with that. So early satiety is a medical jargon phrase for I get full quickly when I eat. I'm not able to eat as much because I get full so early. So there is some research that suggests that people with Parkinson's are at higher risk for what we call delayed gastric emptying. It appears to be more prevalent in the later stages. So what does that mean? So gastric emptying refers to how quickly a substance moves from your stomach into your intestine. So for the general population, solid foods move at about 2 hours to empty into the small intestine, and fluids take about 30 minutes to empty into the small intestine. But in various groups I've spoken to over the years, some have found or have actually had gastric emptying studies and have found that they actually have gastric emptying times of 8 hours, of 6 hours. So the things that they eat are hanging out in their stomach for a prolonged period of time. And you can think about, like, if you got a basket full of fruit and every couple hours you get rid of a piece of fruit, but you're adding a bunch more fruit in, the basket's overflowing, you can't fit anymore. So it's kind of just makes things, occasionally will make it harder to get enough to eat if you're getting full quickly, if things aren't moving as quickly. So ways that we kind of help manage this, or we, instead of having one big meal, we'll encourage little meals throughout the day, to sit up straight for at least 30 minutes following a meal, so you can let gravity do some help and some work there, and to focus on liquids. So liquids tend to move faster. So finding or utilizing more of the nutrient-rich beverages and liquids as your snacks and your meals, like the smoothies, like the protein shakes, those are things that may be a little bit easier for you. So making levodopa work. I know a lot of the times with Parkinson's, we struggle with our Cinemet dosing. Our Cinemet dosage is always changing. And we find that our on times and our off times aren't always the way we want them to be, and our medications don't last as long as or work as well as we want them to. Now, I will warn you, when it comes to like nutrition implications for this, that a lot of this research is very small and needs good replication and better quality research done. But I think many of these interventions are pretty easy to give a whirl to or to try. So just some ideas to throw out there, nothing mandatory, of course, but just some different thoughts. Now, occasionally, some people find that they have a difficulty with protein and their Cinemet medication. And in general, the recommendation is that you should take Cinemet on a largely empty stomach, again, 30 minutes before a meal or 2 hours after a meal. And again, if you have delayed gastric emptying, that can look a little bit different for you, with the exception of a very low protein snack if you're taking the medication on an empty stomach doesn't feel very good. So something like saltine crackers or some plain crackers or some fruit would be like a good food item to take it with. And to avoid, if you're taking like a multivitamin with iron, iron competes with levodopa for absorption. So your iron supplement and your multivitamin should be separate, like 2 hours separate at least from your Cinemet. So levodopa is structurally similar to some types of protein, and it may compete for absorption. And I say it may compete for absorption because oddly enough, only a certain subset of people with Parkinson's have found that their levodopa, their Cinemet, tends to not work as well when they take it near a high protein meal. So some, especially animal proteins like chicken, fish, steak, they find that those foods, when they take their Cinemet close to those foods, their Cinemet doesn't work as well. And so for some people, it's been found that Cinemet may interact with protein and make that medication a bit less effective. So things that have been looked at for the things that have been studied to help manage this would be, they've looked at a low protein diet as just reducing your overall protein intake, that led to significant weight loss and muscle loss, and that ended up being kind of a poor option in terms of like your overall health. But they have also researched a protein redistribution diet. So your daily protein intake, so all the protein you need in a day, is eaten at dinner and bedtime snacks. So when you don't necessarily need your Cinemet to work as well for you, you plan all your protein to be then. It requires some meal planning. It's helpful to do this with a dietitian. It's more difficult to follow than the low protein diet, but people who feel like protein is affecting their levodopa effectiveness have found that it can improve their motor fluctuation by 38 to 80% compared to where it was. So these are just some ideas, and not all protein-rich foods seem to have the same impact. So in Japan, they've been doing quite a bit of research on like soy protein or soybeans or soy milk, and they have actually found that soy protein may improve how well Cinemet and levodopa work. So it may just be that there's different building blocks to those proteins that tend to interact a little bit differently. So plant-based proteins may be a better option to try more of also. So this is kind of what the protein redistribution diet may look like. So you start your breakfast with a nice bowl of oatmeal, and you have some berries, some nuts, and then you have a lunch, like a cream sauce with some pasta, some veggies. And then dinner, you start packing on the protein. So you get some salmon, you get a little extra goods in there, and then you have a bedtime snack of a nice peanut butter protein shake. There's like just some ideas of things of what that may look like. So we're talking about fiber again. It's one of my favorite subjects. They have actually done research on people with Parkinson's and their fiber intake, and has found that people who weren't eating a lot of fiber, when they improve or increase their fiber intake, saw improvements in constipation, one, but they also had significantly higher circulating levels of plasma levodopa. So they had more fiber that they were eating. So like you're adding some nuts to your oatmeal or some ground flax seeds, some chia seeds, you're adding some berries. When they had that fiber-rich breakfast or like a high fiber cereal, when they had the fiber-rich breakfast and they took their levodopa, they found that more of that levodopa was getting absorbed into their body. They've also looked at this specifically with psyllium husks. We've talked about this before with constipation, but another study found that having psyllium husk in the morning led to higher, more stable concentrations of levodopa in their body throughout the day. This is kind of like a kind of a funny topic. This is very, very small research, but it's another thing that is a possibility. So levodopa and lemon. Levodopa is known to dissolve better in acidic solutions when compared with water. So it just dissolves better, emulsifies better in something like lemon water or lemonade. There's a small article that looked at what can the impact of lemon, like an ounce or a shot of lemon juice, be when taking that with your levodopa. And what they discovered was in these 38 people with Parkinson's, 22 of them had reduced gastric acid secretion. So they did not, your stomach is supposed to be super acidic, very, very acidic. And they found that a good chunk of these participants did not have very acidic stomachs, not as acidic as they should have been. So they took those patients who do not have very acidic stomachs and they kind of randomized to say, half of you tried taking your levodopa with lemon juice. And what they found is the people who took the levodopa with lemon juice had significantly higher levels of levodopa at 1 hour and 3 hours after they were taking their levodopa. So just another, like, again, more research needs to be done to see if this is like a replicable or consistent finding, but it's maybe a fairly easy thing to give a shot to or give a whirl to. So finally, we'll talk about like supplements and emerging trends in Parkinson's. And one of the most popular areas of research for anybody or for any particular area is the gut microbiome. So like probiotics and prebiotics. So your microbiome reflects all the non-human cells present in your gut. So for every one human cell you have over one non-human cell. You have a little bit more non-human cells than you have human cells in your body. And the biggest bulk of these non-human cells are in your colon. They're in your gut. And so we've discovered over the last 10, 20 years or less that these bacteria or fungi that are in your gut have a significant role in your health and your well-being. And specifically to Parkinson's, they've done some research looking at what are the types of bacteria that we find in the guts of people with Parkinson's. And what they found is kind of interesting is that if you take a group of people with Parkinson's from, let's say I'm in California and I have Parkinson's, my gut looks significantly different than somebody my age, gender, size, who does not have Parkinson's. So we have very different guts, whether I have Parkinson's or not. The people who have Parkinson's around the world, so maybe in Georgia, maybe in Japan, maybe in France, people with Parkinson's tend to have very similar bacterial populations that tend to be very different from a general population's gut. So we're not quite sure what that means. It's unclear if having Parkinson's changes your microbiome or changes your gut bacteria, or if a certain microbiome predisposes you to Parkinson's. But there may be, and I think there will be, data to come in the near future that talks about, are there ways we can change our gut microbiome, and will that help with our Parkinson's? So some studies have found that when you have more of the bad bacteria, something like E. coli, when you have more of the negative bacteria, that might actually be associated with worsening Parkinson's disease severity. So they're thinking that there might be some link here. But when it comes to the best way to modify your microbiome, to make it healthier, to help prevent some of those bad bacteria from repopulating, is to increase your fiber and to add more variety into your diet. So the good bacteria in your gut really like fiber to eat that helps them become strong competitors to help kind of, box out those bad bacteria. So the best way to do it is to increase the fiber and the variety of fibers, like the whole grains, the fruits, veggies, nuts, beans, and those are all going to be extra helpful for that. And fermented foods are also really helpful. So something like kimchi or sauerkraut or even kombucha, those are all things that may be more helpful for managing or changing those gut bacteria. And I do want to issue a cautionary tale regarding probiotics. So the probiotic industry is quickly becoming, actually it already is, a billion-dollar industry. Unfortunately, most companies right now seem more invested in making money than they are in making quality research about their products. So like other supplements, the probiotics are considered a supplement and are thus not regulated. And it tends to be very difficult to find a probiotic that tells you specifically what's in it. And there's no guarantee that they have, that they're even selling you what is in the bottle anyway, and what they say they're selling you, I should say. Probiotics have a tendency, so like I said, the bulk of your bacteria should be in the colon, not in your small intestine. These probiotics have a tendency to colonize your small intestine instead of your colon. So they tend to populate in the wrong place. And that can lead to a syndrome called small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, which has a higher prevalence in people with Parkinson's in general, and it can be associated with worsening disease symptoms or motor fluctuations and worsening nausea, constipation, belching. So it's not particularly helpful to make that worse. Probiotics are usually just a couple different microbes at most, whereas if you eat more fibers, that encourages the growth of hundreds of different microbes and bacteria. Again, you have longer lasting results with what they call prebiotics, which might just be like a fiber supplement or fermented foods. So those are things that can be, those are things that I would recommend if you're interested in this kind of area. And there might be benefits to probiotics. I think it's certainly possible, and we could see a lot more of that in the future. But to date so far, there's really no quality research that I would make any recommendations when looking at Parkinson's specifically. Turmeric is kind of a popular supplement for a variety of reasons. Some, popular like Alzheimer's research. Some people find it popular with Parkinson's. In case you don't know, it's an earthy, delicious spice that's used in curries and many other cuisines. It gives food a potent yellow-orange color. It's very lovely. The active ingredient you're looking for in turmeric is curcumin, and it's thought to help reduce pain and inflammation, may be helpful with indigestion. When thinking about Parkinson's management specifically, and also with Alzheimer's management, there's not really a ton of good quality evidence. The best evidence is to say, if you like food with turmeric, you should eat more of it and have some black pepper with it, because black pepper makes it work better. When it comes to using supplemental doses of turmeric, so large quantities of turmeric, you have to be careful because it can interact with certain medications like blood thinners, antacids, and oral diabetes medications. So check with your physician first before you take a turmeric supplement, but I highly recommend using it in your cooking because it's amazing, it's delicious, and it's very good for you. So fish oil is another pretty popular supplement. Usually we're looking at DHA and EPA, which are particular fatty acids that are common in omega-3s, and they are thought to have anti-inflammatory properties. The best sources you're going to get from these is salmon, mackerel, sardines, and algae oil. So your fish are going to be your best sources for this. And there's actually a pretty good growing body of research looking at omega-3s with Parkinson's progression. And so some studies have found that omega-3s taken in sufficient amounts may protect against neuron loss and may improve symptoms of depression or delay the rates of disease progression. Now, again, I always have to warn you, if you're going to buy fish oil as a supplement and choose not to eat the foods, you got to look for that USP label. It's really important. And omega-3s from fish is always far superior compared to omega-3s from a capsule. There are things in the fish that will work better for your body and make more use of the omega-3s that the capsules just aren't going to provide. So when possible, eat the foods, but there could be some data to suggest a support from the fish oil supplements as well. So just to summarize briefly, to date, the best diet I can recommend for managing Parkinson's would be a diet that's rich in omega-3s, fresh fruits, fresh vegetables, and fiber-rich grains and nuts. Other things that may help could be like lemon water, maybe kefir, or sauerkraut or kimchi or other fermented foods. Psyllium husk or other fiber supplements may also be helpful for making levodopa work better and managing constipation. And things that don't help would be not getting enough to eat. Again, that's really the main takeaway here is always make sure you're eating enough first, and then you can try out these other fun things as you go along if you want to. So these are some of the studies that I looked at to kind of put this presentation together, and things that I think of to help give you better data and hopefully allow some good, interesting thoughts here. And if you have any questions, I would love to take those from you.
Thank you, Erin.
Yeah.
Does anyone have any questions? You're more than welcome to ask. I do have a question, like a personal question.
Yeah, of course.
About probiotics.
Yeah.
So like I try to find a good one, but I've like bought a little bit of everything. Because you never really know, like.
Yeah. A good summary I would give to probiotics is to know specifically why you're taking it first. So there's a lot of research about probiotics out there, and a lot of the research looks at very specific things. So very condition specific, like, are we looking at probiotics because I have irritable bowel syndrome? Or are we looking at probiotics to manage like depression or anxiety? What is my goal with the probiotic? Because the recommended strains of bacteria vary significantly based on what you're taking it for. So the first things first, you got to figure out like, what is my goal? What is my goal? And if it's like, I just want to increase microbial diversity, you'll get a lot further with that, using increasing your fermented foods, or having like a good quality yogurt every day, or taking, or having sauerkraut or kimchi every day, or other fermented foods, or just increasing your fiber intake for like a prolonged period of time. But otherwise, it really depends on the condition. And there's lots of good research out there and lots of interesting stuff. But yeah, first things first, got to have a narrowed down idea of what the goal is, and then you should be able to find something that kind of suits it. In general, lots of good research is done on one called VSL number 3.
VSL?
VSL, so Victor, Stephen, Louis, number 3. Okay. Yeah, there's lots of research on that one in terms of like managing antibiotic associated diarrhea and other stuff. That's one I actually feel confident that is well regulated and you get what you pay for it, but it is expensive.
Right, because I learned a lot just listening to you talk about vitamins too, because I was like, oh, I didn't know like that this was a thing. Like,
it's really frustrating, honestly.
Right.
You're like, government's letting us down, who'd have thought? Just kidding. But yeah, it's good to be a little bit more cautious with where you're getting those things from. And like a bigger name brand, they generally will have more to lose if they are found to be not helpful. So if you're going to buy one, like a big name brand may actually be a better way to go, because they have more, they want to protect their money and their assets. So they're gonna be a little bit more scrutinizing with how they sell their products and what products they sell.
Gotcha. Thank you for that. Got a little note.
Yeah. Awesome. Good. I want to help everyone that I can, so I'm glad.
Yes. Does anyone have any questions? You're more than welcome to put in the chat or unmute yourself. And
Hi, Erin. It's Megan.
Megan.
So I'm a physical therapy student, and this is one actually of my friend's mom, and she has PD. So this is very interesting to me because I try to relay every information about it to her. So this was very helpful because she's currently taking levodopa. So I was like, oh, I'm gonna tell her about this lemon water. So I thought that was pretty cool. But she's been having trouble eating because I feel like she's always complaining, saying that she's not hungry. How would you recommend to patients, I guess, to eat more? Like, would we just recommend more of, you were saying, like smoothies, something that's easily digestible, or?
Yeah, that's a great question. And yes, usually when someone with PD tells me I'm not able to eat very much, my first concern is like, is it difficult to chew? Are you getting full quickly? Or are you finding that you just don't have an appetite, period? But most of the time for any of those things, we would say like, focus on your liquids first. Focus on like things like smoothies first. So adding like your fruits to those, adding some veggies, adding some protein can really be helpful, because we want to do whatever we can to make sure they stay well nourished and nice and strong, because that will make everything better for them, Parkinson's and quality of life and otherwise. I would say, yeah, lean on those. And even like in the hospital, we tend to use things like Ensure or Boost because it's very easy to drink, an easy way to get some nutrition in. And when things become difficult, we just want to make it easier. So whatever is going to make it easy, whatever is more appetizing. So like little bits of food throughout the day. And it gets hard as you're on more and more Levodopa, because sometimes people are taking Levodopa 5 times a day. And so trying to fit things between those can be challenging. The liquids should interact less with those two as they hopefully move quicker through that. But those are all, those would be like the easiest go-tos. Is if there are nutrient dense liquids we can focus on, let's try that first. If there are small frequent snacks or meals that we can use, let's try that too. Those are good like first approaches to not being able to eat as much as normal.
you're welcome, Megan. Does anyone else have any questions? Okay, well, I would like to thank you for speaking, Erin, and I just want to share just the affirmation for the day. Just want y'all to know that I have all that I need to make today a great day. So even though it's the end of the day for me, because of the time zone that I'm in, make the most of wherever you are, and know that you're great. And then also to end our summer series, we have Elaine Kiba, and she will be speaking on advancements in deep brain stimulation on behalf of Boston Scientific. So if you know anyone that's interested in DBS or just wanting to learn more about Parkinson's resources, please be sure to share the information and be on the lookout for an email, because we have a lot of things going on with Life Renewed PD, some transitions. So I just want to say thank you to y'all for coming, and I hope that y'all have a great day and night. And thank you again, Erin, from the bottom of my heart. Like, you really, thank you.
Thank you for having me, Erica. It was really fun.
Thank y'all.
All right. Bye, everyone. Thank you.